not indicting me. They're indicting you. I just happen to be standing in their way. That's all it is.
I don't think he's the right president at the right time going forward.
If you're up by so much, you would not be worried about anybody else.
Right now, I think the economy is really, really poor, and I think we really need to get some money back in.
Hello, I'm Robert Costa in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. We are still waiting on two possible future indictments against former President Donald Trump, one in the Georgia election investigation and the other in the January 6th investigation being led by the special counsel. And barricades went up outside the courthouse in Atlanta as the Fulton County District Attorney nears a charging decision. Monday marks the first day of a 3-week window the DA has cited down there for potential charges against Trump. A judge also rejected Trump's request to disqualify DA Fani Willis from the case and has blocked his petition to quash a report by a special grand jury she convened. Trump's legal woes, they're mounting at this point and leaving him with a hefty price tag. But the former president is not footing the bill himself. A pro-Trump super PAC spent over $40 million on legal bills for the former president and his aides this year. Trump's allies are also creating right now a separate legal defense fund for legal fees of his allies and advisors. For more on all of these developing stories, Nicole Killian and Major Garrett join us now. Nicole is a CBS News congressional correspondent reporting from Atlanta. Major at CBS News is chief Washington correspondent. Nicole, we'll begin with you out in Atlanta. When are we going to see a charging decision by Fani Willis? She's been talking a bit publicly in recent days.
Yeah, that's right. And she said, in essence, that she is ready to go. That is what she told a local media outlet over the weekend. And as you mentioned, we are now in the beginning phases of this 3-week window that she outlined in a letter several weeks ago, saying that her staff would be working remotely and that she asked judges not to schedule any trials during this period, in effect, because this was part and parcel of some of the preparations that both she and the Sheriff's Department have been making as they work towards this potential charging decision. As you well know, earlier this month, 2 grand juries were officially sworn in. And so one of those grand juries will ultimately hear evidence from the district attorney. We expect that to happen at some point in this 3-week window. We do know one of the grand juries was meeting today, but it didn't appear that they are taking up the Trump case, at least just yet, but certainly possible in the days and weeks to come.
Okay, so that's what's going on in Georgia. Nicole summed it up perfectly for us, but that's not the only thing we're watching. I feel like, Major, you're here with me in the Bureau in Washington. We're watching every minute, whether something happens on the January 6th investigation. What's the latest on that front?
Well, we're sifting all the tea leaves, Robert, to see what timeline Special Counsel Jack Smith is operating under. And there were disclosures last week that he would take more evidence from Bernard Kerik, who worked with Rudy Giuliani on false allegations that the 2020 election was somehow rigged for Joe Biden and against former President Trump. Does that delay proceedings this week? Does that push it off a week? We don't know. What we do know is there are developments in terms of how much this has cost the former president. At least $40 million from a super PAC originally created, Robert. Let's remind us and never forget this. That super PAC was originally created to collect money from small dollar donors to wage this campaign to challenge the 2020 election. The money was never spent for that. It was retained for whatever purposes former President Trump wanted to use. And guess what purposes he's largely used them for? To pay legal bills. Now, do the donors to that super PAC have any idea that that was what they were giving? No, they thought they were giving their money to find out what really happened in the 2020 election. Well, we all know what happened. Joe Biden won and former President Trump lost. So this isn't illegal, but it raises very significant questions about what are you asking your donors for? What are you using it for? And is that any kind of misrepresentation, ethical, legal, or otherwise, among the many questions swirling around this particular matter?
Another question swirling around, Nicole, is what kind of case could the district attorney in Georgia be preparing against President Trump? You look at the January 6th case in Washington, it seems to be a sprawling investigation about an alleged scheme. And based on what I've heard from sources in Georgia, Fani Willis may have a similar type of prosecution in Georgia, some kind of RICO-style prosecution about the sprawling alleged conspiracy led by Trump to pressure election officials. Give us some detail based on what you're hearing from your sources.
Yeah, well, that is certainly possible. And to your point, sprawling really defines this case. Certainly, the centerpiece of it is that call that the former president had with Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger back in January of 2021, where he asked the Secretary of State to find him the 11,000 plus votes, hoping to overturn the results in his favor. Of course, we know that the Secretary of State did not acquiesce. We know the Secretary of State also spoke to a special purpose grand jury last year. And so that is really a centerpiece of this investigation. But it also deals with this false slate of electors here in Georgia, some of whom have agreed to immunity deals with the district attorney, and also this issue of voting data in one of the counties outside of Georgia. So there are a number of different angles and aspects of this investigation that the district attorney has been working on for the better part of 2.5 years, which is why she says that she is ready. There is a lot of speculation that she could potentially pursue racketeering charges, potentially, since that is something we have seen her do in other major sprawling cases. So that is why there is some speculation there. But obviously, we will have to wait until she actually presents this evidence to the grand jury again, which we expect in the coming weeks here, to see ultimately what charges may be brought forth.
Racketeering. I haven't heard that since I was watching a documentary about Bobby Kennedy going after Jimmy Hoffa back in the 60s. But Major, I do wonder, as chief Washington correspondent, someone who's covered the Republican Party for a long time, do Republican voters care? And how are Trump's rivals going to respond? Let's listen to former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley on Face the Nation over the weekend.
I don't think he's the right president at the right time going forward. I think we've got to move forward. We can't have a general election where we are handing it over to Kamala Harris because we're dealing with indictments and court cases and legal issues of President Trump.
That comes close to saying there is something potentially disqualifying about all of this, but it doesn't really use that terminology, and it's not nearly as aggressive as it could be. Republicans say it's a distraction, most of them. Asa Hutchinson and Chris Christie say it's something much worse, but most just still tiptoe around the idea that this is a kind of a problem. It's kind of a low-level annoyance. Either it is or it isn't.
But it's like being caught in a monsoon and calling it a distraction.
Exactly.
It hovers over everything. It
hovers over everything.
The whole race.
And one of the things that we know is all the polling data shows that former President Trump is the far ahead front runner. Not even close. And yet, we don't know what any lived behavior is, Robert, of primary caucus voters going to cast ballots with the front runner indicted on several serious federal felonies. We don't know what that behavior. You know why? Because we've never seen it before. So we're polling in a kind of a universe in which there are intentions, there's a rallying, but is that going to be the strategic, actual impulse of those primary and caucus voters when January and February runs around? That's why all those other Republicans are staying in the race, believing that something is going to change. And one thing that's interesting about the former president's bravado. Last week when the superseding indictment was handed down, that bravado got a very strong legal pushback. Because what did the former president say after the first indictment, referring to this military document and what he did or didn't do at Bedminster? Oh, it was all bravado. It was all just newspapers on the table outdoors. No, the superseding indictment makes it absolutely clear. The document referenced is real. It's in the federal government's possession. And all the things that Trump said after that indictment do not hold up. Yes, they're bravado, but they bear no legal relationship to the facts alleged and what he's going to have to talk about and prove in court.
Speaking of what's real, this is more, Nicole, whether it's in Washington or in Georgia, than just something that's a legal discussion or a political discussion. For those on the ground, there's violence in the air, threats even. What are you learning down in Georgia?
Yeah, that's right. Well, it's a very real concern here in Georgia, and we do know that the district attorney several months ago did ask for preparations to start being made out of concern for any kind of potential disruptions. And so she directed and sent a letter to the Fulton County Sheriff's Office, for instance, asking them to start working on a security plan. One thing we have noticed since our last visit here to Fulton County is that there are now barricades erected outside of the courthouse as we enter this 3-week window. And CBS News has also learned that the district attorney has been receiving threatening emails and voicemail messages at her office, and also here throughout some parts of the county, so much so that the district attorney sent a note to the county commissioners here in Fulton County, encouraging them and urging them to stay alert after she got an email that used racial epithets and also used some other derogatory language to threaten her, or it appears that it was some type of threat. And she said that this is something that is very typical that she has been dealing with over the last 2.5 years. And she expects even more in the buildup to this charging decision. So certainly security not being taken lightly here in Fulton County at all, Bob.
So unsettling to hear about violence in any context, even as it hovers in this way. Nicole, I really appreciate that reporting. And Major, before we go, let's take a look at the list of Republican presidential candidates who are running against former President Trump, who's the front runner for the nomination. When you look at this group of candidates, who is best positioned, based on your political analysis and reporting, to break through in this particular moment with the investigations consuming everything?
Well, that's why this first debate in early August looms somewhat large, Robert. You would never really say, oh, my gosh, that first presidential debate in a cycle on a given party side for their primaries and caucuses is the key moment. It might actually be, because there were several months where Republican donors and Republican voters who liked Trump thought DeSantis might be a really credible heavyweight alternative. That feeling has completely subsided. DeSantis may bounce back, but he lost all of that springboard that came with his midterm route in the gubernatorial election. And if he doesn't regain it, then the field is wide open. Can somebody make a move? And one of the places you can first, who? Well, Chris Christie will be the most aggressive against former President Trump if he's on the debate stage or if he isn't. But Christie is only a one-state candidate.
We'll see.
New Hampshire, so far.
Christie believes a lot of New Jersey people retire to South Carolina.
Exactly. And he may be right about that. South Carolina doesn't show up particularly strongly for Nikki Haley or Tim Scott. Tim Scott is thought to have a lot of potential as a kind of alternative, a sunny alternative to Trump and DeSantis in Iowa.
Out the column in the New York Times.
But again, he still
still
hasn't gained any real momentum. So this August debate will be one of the places where a springboard might be found. If not, then we're going to have a long fall where it's going to be gradual, bit by bit, one voter at a time persuasion, and that doesn't usually show up, Robert, as you know, until right near the end.
Well, I can predict we're going to have a long fall, regardless of what happens. Nicole Killian and Major Garrett, thank you so much. And speaking of Governor Ron DeSantis, he is looking to rejuvenate that campaign. What he's proposing today, we'll talk about that next. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, trying to come back in the Republican race, unveiled his new economic plan at a campaign stop in New Hampshire today. He's calling it, quote, the Declaration of Economic Independence. The Florida governor claims the plan would bring 3% annual growth to the U.S. CBS News political reporter Aaron Navarro joins us now from Concord, New Hampshire. He's been on top of the DeSantis campaign for months now. Aaron, I feel like you're here on the campaign trail more than in Washington, D.C. Give us your real inside read as someone who tracks this every day. Is this a major development for him to release an economic plan, or is it just an attempt to get a little bit of a buzz?
I would lean more towards an attempt to get a little bit of a buzz. Now, the campaign says that this economic plan will be a cornerstone of his race and his argument to voters, but a lot of it is in line with what we've heard from other presidential candidates: cutting government spending, cutting reliance on Chinese supply chains. Now, he had some interesting bits in here that kind of are in line with some of his usual policies, saying that corporations that have diversity, equity, and inclusion policies will be investigated by the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Department, and also targeting banks that do environmental social governance investments, or ESG. That's been a pretty hot topic among Republicans. But, it's him kind of staking his ground when it comes to the economy. But as you noted, and as we've seen in the polls, he still has a lot of ground to make between him and former President Trump.
But in American politics, especially in a summer before a presidential campaign and months before any contest, you never rule anybody out. At least I don't. as a reporter. But this is a tough race, as you say, Aaron. Former President Trump, he took a swipe at the DeSantis campaign over the weekend. Based on your reporting, how has the Florida governor been responding?
Yeah, I was at the Trump rally in Erie, Pennsylvania, and I was counting. Trump spent about 10 minutes straight going after DeSantis, showing polls of DeSantis down on the Jumbotron screen, saying that DeSantis needs to, drop out because he's so down in the polls. I asked the governor about Trump's attacks. Take a listen to what the governor had to say.
If you're up by so much, you would not be worried about anybody else. So the fact that I'm taking the incoming from all of these people, not just him, but a lot of the other candidates, a lot of the media, that shows people know that I'm a threat.
Now, DeSantis in the past has gone after Trump when it comes to policy, but the question I've had is how is he going to attack Trump's rhetoric and character? That's something we hear from Republican voters, that they like Trump's policies. They just are kind of put off by his behavior. And DeSantis seemed to lean into that yesterday in New Hampshire, saying that Trump's attacks were juvenile and aren't going to win votes when it comes to the general election.
What's next for Governor DeSantis? Where does he go from here?
Well, tomorrow he's in Concord to do more retail stops. But in general, what I've heard from him and the campaign and allies is he's going to be doing more of these retail stops, doing more engagements with press in Iowa and New Hampshire specifically, that they think that they can build momentum in those two critical states. So we're going to be seeing a lot of him out in the trail, a bit more maybe than when he first launched his campaign.
And in terms of his campaign shakeup, he has shed a lot of personnel in the last few weeks. Have you seen any real-time effect of all of that when you're tracking his campaign? Is it more of a shoestring operation, a bit leaner? How do you see it?
Well, in the stops I've been to in New Hampshire, they're not necessarily these big rallies that he had in that first week. They're more intimate events, him just going to restaurants, coffee shops, and not necessarily needing all of the personnel with him there to put on a big production. And I asked him, do you like retail politicking? And he pointed to these events as being important for his campaign, kind of making them more direct contact with voters. And that's probably the biggest telltale of the cuts I've seen so far.
And one of the things I have to say about Governor DeSantis in his recent days is he did go to Brown's Lobster Pound in New Hampshire. And I think whether you're a reporter, a candidate, this is a great place to visit. I go there every time I'm in New Hampshire. Not an endorsement. I just like Brown's Lobster Pound. People forget New Hampshire has a great seacoast. Were you there at all, Aaron, or were you busy with Trump and Erie?
Oh, I was there. I was there shooting a video of DeSantis holding lobsters, talking to people. It smelled great in there. I didn't get the chance to eat, but I'm hopeful I'll be back.
I'm hopeful we can be back there together. Aaron Navarro, thank you very much. Appreciate your reporting. President Biden has toured the United States touting his administration's economic policies. But do Americans approve of how he's handling the economy? Up next, we'll look at the new CBS poll on this topic. You're streaming America Decides.
While there's more work ahead, earlier this week, the Washington Post suggested Republicans may have to find something else to criticize me for. Now that inflation is coming down, maybe they'll decide to impeach me because it's coming down.
Welcome back to America Decides. That was President Biden in Maine last Friday discussing his administration's efforts to fight inflation. While inflation has cooled, the president's approval rating for his handling of the economy now sits at 34%. That's according to a new CBS News poll. CBS News Executive Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto, joins us. Anthony, thanks for being here. What do you make of this latest number on the president's handling of the economy? Is it up or down from his traditional level in terms of this question and answer?
Hi, Bob. It's been low. It's stayed low. It is now as low as it's been. But look, people reason from what they perceive as results. And this number I put on the board behind me, I think, tells most of the tale. And that is, okay, people say the job market is relatively strong. It is. We see those macro numbers. Is your income keeping pace with the price hikes and the rate of inflation? 70% say no. So yes, even as inflation is slowing by those metrics, those prices are still there, and people tell us they're still hitting their paychecks. Now let's connect this back to the president. One of the things you know, and you've reported he's out there talking about, is trying to capture or recapture this word Bidenomics. What does it mean? Well, Yeah, he's got some work to do there. We can set a benchmark. We got 59% say they haven't heard of it, don't know much about it. Okay, but for those who have heard of Bidenomics, what does it mean? What comes to mind? You got a lot of Republicans, perhaps cynically, are saying, well, it means higher inflation, tax increases. So he's got some work to do to move this number, this 1/3 that thinks it means job creation, that thinks it might mean lower inflation or the middle class or those things that he wants to sell. So that's your starting point. I think it's going to be really important to watch that as we go forward over the next month or two, Bob.
And what are you learning, Anthony, from the polling about how Americans feel about the economy? Put the president aside.
Yeah, the big thing I really thought stood out is this word they used, which is uncertain. And I'm going to bring it up over here and circle it. It's 56%, okay? 56% that use the word uncertain as well as struggling, which we described. And I think that's important because they've gotten this mixed picture. You've heard macro numbers recently saying things are good. Not long ago, there was talk, would it slip into a recession? A lot of Americans thought that it might. So there's been a bit of a roller coaster, and I think that's coming out here, where people say that they're staying in place. About half of them say they feel like they're staying in place. Another third say they're falling behind, but very few feel like they're getting ahead. So they're getting these mixed messages, not feeling like they're getting ahead, and that puts a damper on those overall economic metrics, Bob.
Any final thoughts about what we should be watching?
Yeah. Number one is, do people think that the president is responsible for the economy and the improvement to the same extent that they've thought he's to blame for it? That's the number you want to watch as well.
We'll keep an eye on that. Anthony Salvanto, as always, on top of it all. Thanks so much for being here. And that does it for us today. You can stream America Decides Monday to Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. You're streaming CBS News.